Last week, the government ended the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, but it also said that it is merging this PMGKAY into the National Food Security Act. Now, what does all these abbreviations mean in terms of how much free or subsidized food the government is now providing? Take a look at this before and after chart that will come up for you. Until December 24th, that is when the announcement was made, 75% of rural households and 50% of urban households got 5 kilos of rice or wheat or coarse cereals under the National Food Security at 3 rupees for rice per kilo, 2 rupees per kilo for wheat and 1 rupee per kilo for coarse cereals. All this is per person. From March 2020, in addition to this 5 kilos, they also got a further 5 kilos of rice or wheat plus 1 kilo of dal free. In total, before December 24, 2022, eligible persons, which is 2/3 of Indians or 81 crore people, got 11 kilos of grains at a maximum spend of 15 rupees. Assuming they took 5 kilos of rice under NFSA, 15 rupees per head, you got 11 kilos. Now, after December 24th, the PMGKAY, the Anna Yojana, ends and it gets merged into the NFSA, as I said. Now, under NFSA, one person now gets 5 kilos of rice or wheat or coarse grains, but the 321 rupees is gone. All of it is free. So the point is 11 kilos, 15 rupees was the earlier regime. It is getting replaced by only 5 kilos, but all of it fully free. Now the questions. Does this hurt the poor seriously because the amount has come down? Does it impact cereal inflation? What are the compulsions to discontinue the Anna Yojana? What is the impact on the fisc? For a 360-degree perspective, joining me to take the discussion forward are Dr. Pronab Sen, the former chief statistician. Also joining us is Mr. Siraj Hussain, former agriculture secretary and senior visiting fellow at the ICRIER, the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, and Harish Damodaran, agriculture editor at the Indian Express, widely travelled, so would know a thing or two about availability of grains. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Dr. Sen, let me start with you. First thoughts on the discontinuation, painful decision or right decision?
Right decision, in my opinion. I mean, that was unsustainable. I mean, if to maintain that, the government would have to increase its procurement quite significantly. And I don't think that would have been a very good idea for agriculture in general. So I think it's the right decision. The question, of course, is what impact would it have on the beneficiaries?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, for me, a serious question. Should I pass that on to Dr. Hussain? What do you think, Mr. Siraj Hussain, that this is putting people into jeopardy, not getting 11 kilos, but 5 kilos?
It is true that some people who are very poor will have to spend more to buy the grains, but it was unsustainable.
Okay.
So it was not possible for the government to distribute 110 million tons of food grains every year, neither desirable nor fiscally feasible, nor physically possible to procure 110 million tons year after year.
Okay. Yeah, I would have thought so too. So in the first place, you know, a more common sense question, Harish, does a person need 10 kilos, 11 kilos of grains? I've you know, made an assessment of my own ability to eat and the expenses at home, and you know, asked around maids, drivers. Practically no one wants 10 kilos. So do you think that 10 kilos was never lifted in the first place?
I think the last NSSO survey showed, I think, average monthly per capita consumption at, I think, about 9 kilos per month in urban areas and about 11 kilos in rural India. So basically now you are going to have you know, basically half the requirement of an average Indian within that particular class, whatever, 2/3 of the population. So you get 5 kg per capita per month, which I think is very reasonable, So this, I think, goes very well with something like, see, we have free education, we have free health, right? And we have free grain. Free grain in the sense, whatever, right to food, So at least whatever, half the requirement of whatever the poor and vulnerable is met, and there's nothing wrong in it, and you supply it free, and I think this is very sustainable. You do the maths, say right now you have 800 million people, right, and 5 kg per month would translate into 4 million tons per month, so which is basically 48 million tons a year. Okay. Now assume that we have our census, so instead of 800 million, it goes to 900 million people. So then again, it comes to about 54 million tons. I think 54 million tons and 48 million tons, I think this is perfectly sustainable, and there's nothing wrong in giving it free, as long as it's 54 million tons and 48 million tons. The problem will come, when you have open-ended procurement and that kind of a thing. I think 54 million tons, 55 million tons, and plus maybe, whatever, for buffer, you need to keep another about 3-4 million tons. I think about 60 million tons of procurement every year, rice and wheat. I think it's perfectly sustainable, and we give this out. And another way of putting it out is, you look at it, say a family of 5, right? So 5 into 5, so 25 kgs. So if this 25 kg were to be bought from the open market, it would have been about 750 rupees, right? Say 30 rupees average.
Yes.
So that much money is being free, and I'm sure all FMCG companies, HUL, everybody would welcome this, and this is fine. I think
take a point. I take a point, Harish. In fact, my argument is against that 9 kilos per urban person and 11 kilos per rural person. I still find that hard to believe, and I had some economists telling me that when this free PMGKAY became available, the drawal under NFSA actually fell, because people didn't want that much grain. That was, something which a couple of people told me. So I have no quarrel that the amount has been reduced. But Dr. Sen, there is another argument that came from, several economists, and especially those who specialize in agriculture, that in the first place, the extra free 5 kilos was not really because people needed that extra 5 kilos, but because food stocks in the FCI were running amok. It was bursting at the seams. The agricultural data of food grain production will come up for you. Over the last 5 years, it has gone up from 250 million tons to 315 million tons. And consequently, the food procured by FCI, by the government, was, going well over 100 million tons, for which there was no warehouse space. Dr. Sen, what's your argument on that? Was it more a supply side dictated largesse and not so much a demand side dictated largesse, the extra 5 kilos?
Lata, I don't think it's really fair of us to criticize the government for what was really, I think, an act of heart.
Okay.
Right? Rather than impute motives to it.
Okay.
So given the situation that we were in, given the fact that supply chains were badly damaged, the only supply chain that could be relied on because of the government's own authority was, in fact, the PDS.
Okay.
And so I think what was done was right. There's no question about it. And let's not impute motives to why it was done. But I think the larger point on the issue of whether or not we're producing too much food grains really rests on what you mean by too much. The fact of the matter is that we have never really focused on exports of food grains. The world does not have an excess supply. The world, in fact, is a deficit in food grains. All right. The problem is we have had such a stop and go policy on exports that it hasn't really enabled us, other than in rice, and that too in specialized varieties, it hasn't enabled us to have a substantial and continuous presence in the world markets.
Okay.
So what the government should do, if it's serious about what it's done, is to really start saying that, yes, we're going to be producing 315 million tons. We will probably not be able to consume more than about 270, 280 million tons. Let's try and export on a regular basis 25 to 30 million tons. But for that, a lot has to be done in actually establishing our presence in the global markets, particularly for wheat.
Okay. Well, there was an argument, I think, by Dr. Gulati that rice is a water-requiring crop, and we are probably exporting water when we are not exactly rich in that resource. But that debate for another day. Let me come to the other argument which perhaps led the government to stop the PMGKAY, the impact on prices. Mr. Siraj Hussain, what's your sense? Do you think the very fact that the FCI stocks or the government stocks are reducing led to the fueling up of cereal inflation? And the cereal inflation chart will also come up for you. It's rising in double digits over the past 3-4 months. Do you think because of inflation we had to stop PMGKAY?
Actually, the wheat inflation is now touching about 20%. Inflation in rice is touching about 10%. But I don't think this particular decision was influenced by the data on inflation. The main factor which would have persuaded the government to stop PMGKAY was the low level of stocks of wheat, because the government, I'm sure, is going to release at least 1.5 to 2 million tons under open market sale scheme. If the government doesn't do that, the wheat price will not come down to the level of MSP. And if that does not come down to the level of MSP, the government will not be able to procure wheat for meeting the requirement of PDS. So I do not think it was due to prices that the government took this decision.
Your sense, Dr. Sen, doesn't it make sense to not do the PMGKAY? And I strongly believe that people don't always consume 10 kilos per person per month. So, would you reduce it so that you can offload in the open market and reduce prices? I mean, is that a theory?
Well, that could be. But let's get something very clear. When the National Sample Survey gives you the data on consumption that was just quoted, right? That is consumption of food grains, both homegrown and purchased.
Okay.
That's not just purchase.
Okay.
Right? Now, if you look at rural areas, so of the rural population, 42% are farming households, who in any case have a substantial amount of homegrown
grains.
Food.
Okay.
Right? So the problem is much lesser than you're making it out to be.
Okay. Okay.
Right? Now, as a result of that, we have a situation where the way that the FCI operates on the open market is the really critical issue which drives food prices, food grain prices. It's not what is being done under the PDS.
Okay. Okay.
And the questions that we should be asking ourselves are the open market sales of food grains by FCI, are they being done properly? And if not, how do you streamline it? Because it's not a question of a shortage of supply.
Okay. But Dr. Sen, if we, gave away 100 million tons by way of PMGKAY plus national food security, then perhaps open market operations will be handicapped. There wouldn't be enough to offload when prices rise. Isn't that an argument?
Not necessarily. Everything then depends on what Mr. Hussain said. It is how you're working between your MSP and the open market price.
Okay.
That's the balance that has to be struck. And, this is a dynamic issue.
Okay.
So when you're doing food management and the nature of the food grains market in India is such that the open market actually represents a relatively small proportion of the total food grain that's available. And so there has to be a really well thought out program of managing the food grain stocks.
Okay. I would like to hear more about that, as well impact on the fisc, as well whether, 81 crore people need that kind of free food. Do we need to target these things much better? Those questions after.